Hello and welcome. When you go to meet a Nobel-winning economic laureate, you expect to talk about the state of the world economy, the recovery after the COVID pandemic. What you don't expect to be doing is to be talking about food, and that is exactly what we'll be doing today. My guest on Jab We Met is Abhijit Banerjee, so welcome to India. Great to have you with us. Your new book, Cooking to Save Your Life, is out. You've been talking about this book for a long time, and now you're finally out with your book. What is it that you're going to be making for our viewers today?
So I'm going to make something which is I think going to be weird for Indian viewers, but I think it's actually very easy to make. It's a fatty cheese. In this case, I'm going to use Robiola, but you could use many fatty cheeses. In India, we make brie now. Marinated in oil, so you take fat and put it in more fat, but it turns into something wonderful. After a few hours, it's going to turn into something rich and wonderful, and people will eat it with crisp bread or baguette.
Great to be here. Come, let's take a seat. So when one would come to meet Dr. Banerjee, you typically expect to be talking about randomized trials and what's happening with all the experiments that you're doing at JPAL. You don't expect to be talking about food. So let's start at the beginning. Professor, how did you become fascinated with the idea of being a chef or cooking up quite a meal?
So I'm not a chef. I'm someone who mostly cooks for friends and family, and a chef is someone who can cook for 50 people with full control. I don't presume to even try that. I cook for friends and family, but I've been doing it for forever. So I have some credentials, at least.
I know, and your brother said that you're a fantastic chef, and he was voting for a Michelin star to be given to you.
He's my brother.
So tell us, what are you doing? So you keep telling our viewers about what Chef Banerjee, not Dr. Banerjee, is up to.
So what I'm making today is something that I think most people will find weird. Indeed, I find even in the US people find it weird, which is you take some fairly fatty cheese, and I'm not so particular about which one. It could be, in India now you can get pretty decent bries that are locally made, for example, brie-like cheeses that are locally made, and you can do that because the quality of is not. If the cheese were very, very tasty, you wouldn't want to do this. This is something you do with a relatively bland cheese. In Italy, they use Robiola, and I'm going to flavor the cheese. I'm going to marinate the cheese in oil, which seems counterintuitive. So cheese is a bunch of fat. You get some more fat, so you call your cardiologist. But in the meanwhile, it's really delicious. It's something that, and other than pouring this oil, which is taking forever, is actually going to be extremely fast, and you will be able to impress your guests after 5 minutes of work and few hours of marinating. You'll be able to impress.
You sharing the results of some new random controlled trials, I totally understand. What's the purpose of a Nobel-winning economic laureate writing a book on cooking food? What is it that you're telling us that MasterChef isn't?
Oh, I think I'm saying something very different. I think people in MasterChef are showing you that they are amazing geniuses who can, do miraculously beautiful things. I'm cooking at the level of most of us, which is that we're not geniuses. We cook mostly to save our lives, and we cook. We don't have all the rare ingredients and very fine hands and all those things. So what can you do if you have Rahul Kanwar coming to dinner, and you're super impressed by him, and you would like him to go home and tell his friends that he ate a meal that he would remember? What would you do in that? And you came home from work an hour and a half ago, and you have 2 children, and they need to be, one needs to do his homework, the other one needs to do, be consoled, and what do you do when that's the context in which most Indian chefs, home cooks survive, but it's one where I think most cookbooks don't address. So a cookbook that's very clearly, kind of connect to the social context, connected to the debates we have about, what kind of food is, ethical food, for example. All of these things are very real in our lives, but not necessarily, and there are chefs who are very conscious of the ethical dimension and chefs who are very conscious of the environmental dimension, but it's something that is another, I mean, it's not, whereas for us, we don't really have all those options. We couldn't, if you ask me that to use only ingredients that are grown in your farm, I'll be out of luck. I have no farm, and so it is something that most people who cook, and most people in India, most families, somebody cooks. They're not going to be able to handle. So this is a cookbook, kind of in the sense of, a lot of my economics is also kind of it's meant to be in the context of real people's real lives, and that's maybe what's different about it.
Given the amount of oil and cheese that you're using, and I was reading in your book that you're not big on clean eating or very healthy eating, that you like to live it up and relish your meal with whatever goes into it.
I think I have the view that a lot of people, especially poorer people, have, which is that when you're cooking a meal to be special, it should be special. When it's not, if you look in the cookbook, there's also thin moong dal and baigan cooked with poppy seeds and all the home food of India, and a cabbage cooked with coconut. So but the idea is that when I'm making something, I'm inviting guests. I think to pretend that we're going to treat it as a daily occasion, that to me is not helpful. So I tend to cook with the view that this is something I'm going to do. These dishes I make, once in 2 months, but when I do it, it's because I have someone I want to feed well for whatever reason, coming to dinner or lunch, and so so, and I think that's the focus of the book, is that you want to do something special. You don't have particularly special skills, you don't have particularly special ingredients, you don't have particularly a hell of a lot of time. How can you sort of get there? And so that's a kind of an optimization perspective, if you like. Economists think about constraints and how do people make the most of what they have, and and that's very much the perspective of the book. You're making most of what you have, not kind of turning you into some amazing cooking machine.
You see a bit of a dichotomy there. Someone who writes so much about development economics or poverty, or trying to use government welfare, talking about using in your chef avatar some of the finest ingredients, and talking about how that's just the way to go from your perspective?
Actually, no. I mean, one thing that I think is, in fact, we have a long discussion of it, not a long, couple of paragraphs in the book. I think we get it wrong when we think about poor people. Poor people don't like boring food. If you go to now we have the Chhat Mela or something. If you go to some Mela like that, you'll see that people are going to be thousands of people there eating this, eating that. Not things that are particularly healthy or efficient in terms of giving calories. Just things that are fun. I think fun has to have a important space within our understanding of the lives of the poor. They have festivals, they have parabs, they will go on days when, many days eating just whatever, dal and rice if they can afford dal, or potatoes and rice if they can't. But then one day they'll blow some money, and that to me is not, and then we'll say that, well, why aren't they saving up for the future? And that to me, in Poor Economics, which is our first book, we in fact make this very specific case that that's crazy psychologically. I mean, you're telling people that, look, you know, yeah, if you saved 2 cents a day for, you know, 35 years, you will be able to buy a motorbike. This is nonsense. You know, that's not how people live their lives. They need excitement occasionally. They need the relaxation that, you know, nice food offers. And so, you know, even among very poor people, you'll find a day in the year or 2 days in the year when they just want to blow it. And that blowing is the natural way to live, not the sort of the, you know, let's do every day the least cost solution to the problem of nutrition or something. That's just psychologically so
I love
not there.
How when you speak even about food, there's a lot of economic theory that comes in different ways.
Yeah. The book has a lot of. I mean, I think we're very conscious about that, which is that we wanted to. It's not meant to be a book that's you know, written by my alter ego. It's a book written by me on food.
So what I figured out so far is that you've got oil and you've put a lot of cheese in it. What is it? What form is it going to take next?
Nothing. I put some tarragon and some garlic, some crushed peppercorns, some salt and some vinegar, and now I'm going to taste it a little bit for the salt, and then I'm going to put it in the fridge for till tomorrow morning, and then it's marinating, it's absorbing all these delicious flavors that I've now put in. It's good actually. I don't need any food.
It's nice. So we're going to be stepping into the kitchen, and this is one part of our meal, and let's see where we go next. So Chef or Dr. Banerjee, what's happening next in this kitchen?
I'm going to make soup with, it's going to be a potato and tomato soup, very kind of earthy soup, which is delicious when the potato, like now in winter in India, where the potatoes and the tomatoes are very tasty. So I'm going to start by softening some onions, add some garlic, add some red chili, and then add the potatoes, soften them, add the tomatoes, and then let them cook and get soft. And then what gives it taste is I'm going to make a pesto with walnuts, basil, and a little bit of balsamic vinegar. And that pesto is what's going to really make it pop. So it's going to be a relatively earthy soup with a very tangy pesto.
Interesting.
Very
do you
complex.
Experiment a lot with your food, or do you have, like, there's a cookbook that you refer to, or some fixed recipes, or do you like kind of make it up along the way as you go along?
I don't make up as I go along. I cook from. I read about food all the time. I drool over food recipes all the time, and then I choose a bunch of them, and you know, every week I'll try 3 or 4 new recipes. And then first time you do it, my philosophy is I do it very literally, unless there's something completely idiotic about it. And then the next time,
it's like an experiment. Like an
experiment, exactly, a non-randomized experiment. But then the next time I will be much more, you know, I'll have a judgment. I'll say, you know, this one I feel like it's a good recipe, but this is missing, and this one just.
But tell me, you don't start calculating p-values and regression values.
No, I mean, especially given
independent variable this, dependent variable this, and then let's see what comes out of it.
Not quite, but you know, once an economist, always an economist. So you don't quite escape from worrying about, you know, the last time you made it, it was pretty good, but maybe that was misleading, because after all, you are you know, it was lucky and the ingredients were very good. So you know, there's always the thought about randomness, which is something that, you know, everybody's life is always sort of, there's a big piece of it in everybody's life, and in mine perhaps more than others, since I'm you know, I also end up doing many things that I'm not particularly good at. But I think it's Mostly, but it is very, very much like a process of learning by doing. You learn and you kind of modify, and you end up with something that is to your taste. And there's no way to. I think there's no real. I think the truth that there's a true recipe which everybody will love, I think is just misleading. I think every recipe is a starting point for everybody's own journey, and then they will figure out, okay, I really want it to be sourer. I'm going to add, 3 tablespoons of lemon juice to it, and if you serve that to me, I will say that's a mistake. But for us, somebody else, it might be the best idea they ever had.
So let's also use this opportunity, since you're in India, to talk a bit about the state of the economy. Particularly in the Indian context, sitting where you are at MIT, when you look at the numbers coming out of India, GST collections seem to be on a high. We're seeing the stock markets in stratosphere. We're seeing the government push out a disinvestment plan with Air India finally beginning to see the light of day. And we're seeing the IMF talk about a bounce back, with India once again emerging as the fastest growing economy in the world, even as it comes out of a low base effect. What's your reading of the current post-pandemic situation? I don't even know whether we're in a post-pandemic world, but what's your reading of where we are at the back of the second wave at this point?
I think that the thing that worries me in a lot of these is partly, it's just something that I complain about a lot, which is the fact that we don't have much or almost any reliable data on the informal sector. But a lot of people's hunch is that what this pandemic did, among other things, was to clobber the informal sector. And if that's true, then what we should be worrying about is how much of the, first, I think that means that whatever they are, these numbers are going to be relatively unreliable, because it's sort of the way we compute the informal sector is as a ratio of the formal sector till we readjust that, and we haven't done that. So we're going to probably overestimate the bounce back, the real bounce back, because it's not going to be...
Why will we overestimate the bounce back?
Because the way we calculate the size of the informal sector is kind of like a multiple of the formal sector. And if the informal sector has disproportionately shrunk, then we might actually see, we'll think we are going to measure it by increases in things that we can measure easily, which are formal sector output of different kinds and agriculture. But then there's this little 30, 40, 50% of the GDP which come from somewhere else, and that's going to be much less well measured. And so the question is, how big is that discrepancy? How much smaller is the informal sector now than it was in 2019? And we don't know that. We don't even know actually what happened with demonetization. We don't know how much of the informal sector shrunk as a result of that and never revived. And so I think what we're waiting to find out is that, which is the extent to which the informal sector will. Now, one result of the informal sector being clobbered is that a lot of, for example, the retail sector, the formal retail sector is going to do better as a result of that. So it might even be that we are, so I think the stock market is doing well, partly because the rest of the world is also in a mess, and India, maybe people think it's a less of a mess. Some money from outside is coming. Partly it's also just that I think we are right in thinking that the formal, the price earnings ratios are pretty good, and I think that part of the reason is the earnings have now, and the people are now starting to buy. They have actually kind of were frozen into a bit of saving, for fright saving during the pandemic, and now they are out and they're saving, spending money. And especially if the informal sector is less good at selling things, then that might actually be a very good, it could be real good news for the formal sector. So I'm not, I don't know, I don't think anybody knows really how these pieces fit together. And in particular, I think the the informal sector story is something that I think some people have some intuition about what might be going on, but I haven't seen anybody doing credible measurement of what's happened to this informal sector, because it really needs to be done state by state.
Is on the state of the informal sector.
Correct.
The other question that comes to my mind, and while obviously only history will give us an exact answer, how do you think the pandemic has changed the course of the global economy, and especially India's place in the world economy, with China clamping down on tech firms in the way that it is, and the government pushing PLI and trying to attract investments to India, manufacturing to India? Do you think long-term meta trends will suggest that some of these supply chains will indeed move to India? Do you see that happen, or would you be very wary in the kind of response that you give?
I mean, I think that it's true that the world is worried about being, China's being the one supplier to the world. On the other hand, I don't know. I mean, supply chains are very delicate things, and building them takes a long time. Building reputations takes a long time, and we have competition. I mean, we have, Bangladesh, which did much better in this period. We have Vietnam. There's a bunch of countries which are in competition with us. So it's anybody's guess, and anybody's guess is the right answer at some sense based on the underlying economic theory, which says that essentially some combination of, if you happen to have the right connections, then people will give you a chance, and if you do well, then they take a bit more from you. That's how supply chains get built. And Chinese supply chains have shown a long history of reliability. And I know people are worrying about China being, the government behaving the way it has been behaving, and they're right in worrying. I'm share the worries, but I do think that there is no substitute for reputed suppliers. I think that's a central advantage they have. They built an amazing set of suppliers who are all very, very committed to supplying at least things that buyers want, whether they are made with the best ingredients, whether they are telling the truth always about how environmentally compatible they are. This is questions I don't have the answer to, and I certainly have my doubts. But I would say that in terms of what, if you were a plastic goods seller in the US and you had to think of a supplier in India, you're going to worry about, are they going to be reliable? Can they sell at the scale I want? Can they ramp up as fast as I want? I mean, you can get turnarounds of 2 weeks from China. You order something, and 2 weeks they give you a freshly molded plastic object. This is just the level at which they operate seems to be, it's an aspirational goal for India. So we'll see. I hope it actually moves, because I think it's good for the world to not be too reliant on China. But it worries me that every individual buyer in the US, every sort of large buyer, will worry that, oh well, yes, I would love to have the supply chain move and not rely on China, but why not have other people supply from India? And I get it from China, because China is the easiest place to buy from, and the Chinese are being often willing to manipulate the exchange rate if there is some hesitation, there might be an exchange rate effect, etc. So I'm not sanguine about what's going to happen, but I really don't think anybody knows. I think it's really it depends on a bunch of very specific pieces of luck that could break India's way, Bangladesh's way, Vietnam's way, China's way. We don't know.
So as we discussed the state of the economy, what's the state of that soup, Professor?
It's ready for getting water, and what I will need to do is actually get some water from the tap and put it in, and put some salt and pepper, and then let it simmer.
I'm also curious to understand from you, Chef stroke Professor Banerjee, what you think of the recent economic policy decisions of the Modi Sarkar. For a long while, it seemed that the government was pushing a very strong socialist welfare agenda, which it still is. But now they've made some big, bold, radical decisions like disinvesting Air India, coming out of the whole national monetization pipeline. What are you making of what the government's been doing or maybe had to do because of the pandemic distress?
I think I think the monetary pipeline, I do think that one of the things that has substantially penetrated in India is some form of digital payment. I think through the UPI system, it just seems to be everywhere. And even I was in rural Bengal, and you see Paytm. So I do think that that's been a success of the government. I don't know how much of that has changed the level of the transactions, in particular whether that actually, to what extent the cashlessness of it really matters. I think that's a bit of a, I don't think anybody really knows, but I do think that the infrastructure, that particular policy and its expansion that's happening is, I think, probably one of the successes of this government. And with Air India, I do feel that it was long overdue, and I feel like it was a great success of our bureaucracy to have resisted it for so long, and I'm so glad it happened. But I think so I hope the Air India is just the thin end of the wedge. I hope there's a whole bunch of other government companies that could be privatized with no loss of, there'll be many arguments for how this will endanger national security and do awful stuff. But for example, I think if we could somehow manage to get rid of some of these banks, that wouldn't be a bad thing. I think, just get it down to 49% of the government share to 49%. I don't think that would be a bad thing. I really think that the amount of inequality that we generate by essentially let our elite borrow and then not repay, and then bail out the banks using taxpayers' money is just gratuitous and grotesque. I do think that at some point we need to just say that we need a structure where the taxpayers' money isn't so much on the line for the SR's debts and other people's malfeasance of various kinds.
Dr. Banerjee, you're a man of many talents. Last time we met at Jawaharlal Nehru University, you were playing a game of ping pong, and a mean game at that. And now you're cooking up a meal for how many people? You've got 12, 14 guests coming, and you're making food for them?
Yep.
Wow, that's interesting. They'd probably be thinking you're serving some randomized control trial. Instead you got a full 4-course meal happening.
No, 7-course meal.
7-course meal happening. Nice. We wish you all the very best. Thank you for taking our time. Thank you for making stuff. Once this shoot is over, we'll be coming back to taste some of this food as well, to find out asli khane mein kitna dum hai. That's critical.
Proof of the pudding is in the eating.
Proof of the soup and of the cheese is in the eating. Yeah. So we'll come back once this is ready. Thank you very much for joining us. Wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.